U.S. court rules Ohio can restrict children's use of social media. Ohio can implement a law requiring social media companies, including Meta Platforms' Instagram, to obtain parental consent before allowing children under 16 to use their platforms, a U.S. appeals court ruled on Thursday. I have I have slightly mixed but positive views of this thing. On one hand, I think kids, if you restrict them from being allowed to do something like this, are ultimately going to find some way around it if they really, really want to. And like the more that you restrict these kinds of things, the more it's going to push kids to want to do it just by virtue that you're keeping them from doing it. And they're little rebels, those little rebels. But on the other hand, I think I'm slightly more in favor of these types of rules because I genuinely believe in the destructive nature of social media, not just on children, but on adults too. I very strongly believe in freedom and liberty, so adults should be able to make their own choices. If they're over 18 years old and they're legally an adult and they can vote and whatnot, they should have the ability to sit on social media all day and brain rot themselves into oblivion, right? If that's their choice, that's their choice to make, and they can do that. I don't think it's good. I think it's really bad. Do I think the state should be coming in and restricting it? No, but with the case of children, I think it probably makes a little bit more sense. And we do have these sort of a more of a legal precedent of doing that kind of thing, of restricting them. I mean, we restrict them from various types of alcohol or tobacco or all these other kinds of things that we see destructive to kids, and also to adults, but we allow adults to make that choice for themselves because freedom and liberty are important. I think I am very slightly in favor of this kind of thing. You know, obviously it won't keep literally all kids away from it. Like I said, if they really want it bad enough, I'm sure they'll find a way around it. But um, I think social media for the most part is a very destructive force. I try to not use it at all. I don't have an Instagram. I don't have a TikTok. I mean, I have a TikTok that I upload some shorts to, but like I don't scroll TikTok. I don't scroll Instagram. I don't scroll Facebook. Because I think it's just bad for a number of different complex reasons. I'm not going to get into all the reasons right this moment just because that's a longer, more in detailed discussion. But I think it is a very destructive force and has hurt us as a society, as a people, in a number of different ways. A 2-to-1 panel at the Cincinnati-based 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned a lower court ruling that had put the law on hold at the request of the tech industry trade group NetChoice. The panel found the law did not violate free speech protections under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. NetChoice said in a statement that the court's decision threatens the online privacy and constitutional rights of Ohio residents. But the group remains fully confident that this unconstitutional law will ultimately be struck down permanently. Of course, an industry group for the tech giants, NetChoice, who's probably representing interests like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, are going to want, and TikTok, are going to want children to be able to access these platforms because they're some of their biggest customers, right? They're how they make a tremendous amount of their money. Not only through, the amount of ads they're able to feed them, which is a huge source of it, but there's also more nefarious reasons like the political influence that they can exert on them and things like that. So yeah, it's not surprising. And honestly, if I was the court, I wouldn't really consider what NetChoice has to say about this very much at all, right? I might consider what like a third-party non-tech industry affiliated group would have to say about this, right? If you have some sort of free speech group coming out and making this sort of argument, I think it would hold a bit more weight. But of course, the tech industry is going to be interested by any means necessary, by any argument and reasoning necessary to try and prevent this sort of thing from being pushed through. The ruling comes as governments around the world, including in Australia, move to restrict children's access to social media, reflecting growing concern among lawmakers about the platform's effect on young people's health and safety. The Ohio case is one of an array of legal challenges that NetChoice has been pursuing to prevent states from implementing laws the authorities say are needed to protect children from the mental health dangers posed by social media. Like I said, there is a precedent for restricting young people from certain things in the world, right? Like freedom and liberty is a very important thing for adults, but for children, while they're developing, especially, we ban alcohol, we ban tobacco. We ban access to pornography and all these sorts of things to people under 18 because we have deemed it to be destructive. And all these things have very strong arguments of being destructive for adults too, but freedom and liberty outweighs the destructive nature of that. But the younger you are, the more destructive these things are. And so their freedom and liberty matters too, but the destructive nature of it, while if the freedom and liberty is here for adults and destructive nature is here for these things, for like tobacco and alcohol and pornography and whatnot, well, that the equation shifts as you get younger, right? The the destructive nature of it starts to outweigh the freedom and liberty part of it when it comes to children. So there's a precedent for all of this. And on a more intuitive level, I think it makes sense to sort of restrict children from all these things because I think social media is, for the most part, a pretty destructive thing for everybody, adults included. The Ohio law, known as the Social Media Parental Notification Act, was passed by the state's legislature in 2023 and took effect in January 2024, only to be quickly blocked from being enforced by U.S. District Judge. The law requires operators of websites that can be reasonably anticipated to be accessed by children under 16 to verify their age. It provides an 11-factor list to determine whether a website falls within that definition, along with certain exceptions. Operators of websites that can be reasonably anticipated to be accessed by children under 16. That includes a lot of educational websites too, I would assume, right? And so, I think if that is the exact wording they use, maybe they need to clean up this bill a little bit because, the idea that, you would require children to verify their age for, an educational website. I mean, maybe that's part of the certain exceptions thing, but there's plenty of website examples I can think of where it would be totally fine and they should have unrestricted access to it. And they shouldn't have to go through the hurdles and roadblocks and annoyance of having to verify their age for an educational website and things like that, right? So I don't know, maybe I need to see the exact wording of the bill, but the way it's laid out, unless the education and all of the things that I think would be proper are laid out in those exceptions, there's got to be some examples that aren't. Then this may be a little bit too broad, a little bit too all-encompassing. NetChoice, whose members include TikTok, Alphabet's Google, YouTube, and Facebook, and Instagram owner Meta, have argued that the law was unconstitutionally vague and improperly restricted children's access to content protected by the First Amendment. But U.S. Circuit Judge Eric Clay, writing the lead opinion, said that while the law does place some burden on protected speech and limits how social media companies prefer to distribute their content, it was narrowly written to address Ohio's compelling interest in protecting children. So yeah, I'm slightly torn on this. On one hand, I think I'm slightly in favor of this. On one hand, I think, the more you restrict these kinds of things for children, the more they're going to want to do it because they're little rebels, aren't they? And the more that they're going to, I'm sure there's still ways that if these children really want to do it, maybe using a VPN or something like that, they can find their way into using these platforms. But on the other hand, I think social media is extremely damaging and destructive in a number of different ways to society and people, adults and children. And in theory, in the same way like tobacco and alcohol and pornography, right? If those are also harmful to adults, right? But the younger you get, they would get more and more harmful. Eventually, the equation between the importance of freedom and liberty and the destructive nature of these things sort of start to swing in the opposite direction. And I think I'm mildly in favor of this sort of thing. And if it successfully manages to keep at least a majority of children from accessing social media and the negative consequences of it, then I think that's probably a good thing. While I'm sure, you can't literally keep them all from getting it. Like I said, some of them are still going to want to do it. And the more you restrict this kind of thing, you're going to have a backlash effect. The more these little rebels are going to want to do it anyways. But that is what it is. And yeah, I'm mildly in favor of this kind of thing. So